Tim Cook's Successors? A G3 chip in the Mars rover? This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Headspace. Meditation made simple. Visit headspace.com/MacVoices for a free 1-month trial. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is part 2 in a 2-part MacVoices live discussion where we took topics from our audience and threw them out to the panel. In part 1, we talked about the M1 iMacs, or the alleged M1 iMacs, and started a conversation about why, after all this time, we still invoke Steve Jobs. That second topic continues as we start this discussion, morphs into some commentary on Tim Cook's Successors, the Mars rover's G3 chip, and a whole lot more. So let's go right back to the panel and continue the discussion. Brian in the chat room brings up an interesting quote that I'd honestly forgotten about. He says, "I think Jobs would have nukes launched by now at Google over Android." Didn't he say something like he was going to thermonuclear war over it? And that is
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that is an interesting point.
Yeah,
I think so.
I'm glad they didn't, honestly. I think that the differences between iOS and Android and how, as far as market share goes, has shown that, honestly, iOS is the superior platform. People are willing to spend a lot more money to get into Apple's ecosphere than they are to get the latest Google from whoever is making the, this week's flagship Android phone.
Would the iPhone be so good without competition? No. So competition's good.
Absolutely not.
That's not what I'm saying, though.
Right. But it's a similar idea, and it can be the right operating system for somebody. Like, it's about the right tool for the job, and without competition, I don't think it would be the same platform. Just like Warren's saying, I agree with that.
We would still be ready for cut and paste.
Yes, and it's the same thing that I said about I think it was Windows 7. When Windows 7 came out, that's how long I've been at this. I was looking forward to it because everybody was talking about how much better Windows 7 was than what we had before, and how great it was going to be. And I was jazzed about it because, if Apple really gets operating system competition and doesn't just sit around in Cupertino going, you know what would be awesome? What if you had this dashboard and it was full of widgets and you could just pull that up and have weird little crap on your screen all the time? If Apple actually had to compete, and that's one of the things that I like about Android, is that on mobile, they have to compete.
Frank,
Go ahead.
Oh, Frank, I want to give you the last word on this, and then we'll move on to another topic. But you were around, for a lot of the years Jobs was.
I bumped into him actually once.
Oh, okay. So do you do you think we're being disrespectful here of the memory and what he accomplished?
No, it's the old cliche that if we've seen over the mountains, because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. The only thing I occasionally think about sometimes is, you remember when he first came back, he said the first thing we got to do is simplify this line. He did the quadrants.
And
right? Professional, customer, desktop, laptop. Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound like, you were complaining about before, but I sometimes wonder about the iPhone and the way they're going about that. Because I think earlier in an episode several months back, we talked about a 3-tiered system possibly. And I was just watching some YouTube stuff, and it's like there's 6 variations coming out of the phone each year. And I'm like, why can't there be just an SE, a regular iPhone, and then an iPhone Pro?
I would interject that is probably a sign of Tim Cook and his third-party plural team focus at Apple, that they're looking to cover multiple niches in the market and not just try to drive 1 or 2 product configurations as one size fits all for everyone.
And
Yeah.
what is the company? 500 times bigger than it was then, or 2,000 times bigger than it was?
True.
It's not really comparable to what, it was a company that was about to go out of business and needed to, conserve its cash and put all its arrows where they were going to do the most good. Now, they're the largest company in the world and they can afford to diversify. And, it may well be that it's the best thing, sad to say that Steve Jobs wasn't around running it for the last 10 years. That's a typical thing that the founders, aren't always the people to push forward,
Right.
to me, it seems like I don't hear much of this, talk about Steve Jobs. There's a lot of talk about Tim Cook. And interesting discussion, which we don't know anything about, is is he going to be around forever? What's next after Tim Cook?
No.
Yeah. But
who's
it seems like
ready?
it's fully become Tim Cook's company. It's and he was, from all accounts, he was doing a lot of running it for 5 years before Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Before Steve died.
Right. Steve was grooming him, and I'm wondering who Cook is grooming.
Oh, he is. We talked on TDO about the succession plan because it was announced or part of public filings or something that Apple had updated the succession plan. And now, of course, I can't remember any of that. But like who we were actually talking about it being. But it's definitely a thing they're thinking about. You can't be $1 trillion company and not have any idea what happens if the CEO spontaneously combusts tomorrow afternoon.
True, but I'm just curious because I think Steve Jobs started grooming Cook, as I recall, 8 years before he left. It was a long time
before. Yeah.
So that means Cook has already had somebody under his arm.
Oh yeah.
And I'd be curious to know who that is.
And he'd been there 15 years or something before.
Something like that,
1998.
Before before he got anybody's attention and became a person on the leadership page at Apple's website. So like it wasn't like he was new, when the news broke about him becoming a bigger deal, everybody, was going, who's this guy? And anybody who'd been closely watching Apple knew exactly who he was. He was the supply chain guy. He knew exactly how all the pieces fit together to make manufacturing happen. So he was totally the right person. So I think operations is where we should look for where the next person is.
Especially since they were transitioning from a lot of U.S. plants to overseas manufacturing. So Tim Cook was like, I almost said a bad word there, neck deep. There, we'll go with neck deep in putting all that together. So he was absolutely the right person at the right time to continue moving the company in the direction that they needed to go at the time. Now, he's been pretty much top dog for, if you really think about it, for like the last 15 years. So what's coming next? What direction is the company going to go in the next direction? Right now, it all seems to be services. Services seems to be the big push. Is that going to continue with the next guy? Who can say?
And I want to wrap this up and move on, but one last thing. I don't think there is a guy or a lady. I think there is a panel. I think there's
Guy
a group.
disagrees with you.
Well, that's okay. But I think at a company this size, they can't put their money on one person to be grooming them. Not yet. Not until Tim says, "I'm ready to pack it in a year or 2 years." Then it'll be made.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next thing, and I feel obligated, since Mark went to so much trouble of creating his background, I wanted to ask him, because this also seemed to be a bit of a timely topic. So, Mark, what are you bringing up with your background and your question?
Well, over the weekend, Warren Buffett, released his chairman's letter and the Berkshire Hathaway annual report. It used to be in the mid-month of March and used to sometimes coincide with my birthday, but for about the past 5 or 6 years, he's been doing it at the end of February because of other SEC disclosure rule changes that trigger that. And this year's letter, he was talking about the way he views Berkshire. It's a collection of businesses, and he drew the distinction that some of them are businesses he owns completely, 100%, and others are shares of businesses that he doesn't own and control 100%, of which Apple was one. There are others like Charter Communications and others on his list. And he was talking about that, and he was talking about the benefit of share repurchases, which in many places last year seems to become a dirty word because of I think because of the political campaign that we ran through. But as he points out, the benefit of share repurchases is it returns money to shareholders who want to trade their stock for shares, and it continues to concentrate the ownership of people who continue to hold. And he pointed out there's a quote in the background image that by 2018, when they stopped purchasing Apple, they owned 5.2%. And currently, they own 5.4% because of the share buyback programs that Apple did. And he points out there, in more language than I could put on the screen, that increase in percentage ownership cost them nothing. It was all a result of Apple having shareholder-friendly policies and buying back shares because they had more cash than they had opportunities and ideas to fund. And so that was very much on my mind. Also related to that, so also linking to maybe the prior discussion about Steve Jobs is, I think maybe many people remember, maybe they don't, is, when Jobs died in October 2011, Apple's shares, sort of peaked in 2012, and they really went nowhere for the next, 3 or so years. They were just sort of going up, going down, and there's all sorts of nitpicking. Is Tim Cook really the appropriate person to lead Apple? And all sorts of other commentary, because commentators get paid to fill space, not to have good thoughts. So it was really in 2016 where Buffett indicated in his first 13F filing that Berkshire had taken a stake in Apple, that all of a sudden people realized, okay, Apple is not in this hyper growth phase. It's made the transition painfully over 3 or so years, and it's going back into basically. I think Warren said this as far as his ownership, that it's a consumer goods luxury brand, and he's a man who notoriously says that the quickest way who says I forget, the quote goes something like risk comes from not understanding something. And that's why we invest in so few things that we really understand well and deeply. And he certainly understands consumers. So all of these were random thoughts that were on my mind when I created this background.
I'm kind of glad you brought this up, because it is something that I think about once in a while, and then I forget about it because nobody seems to talk about it. The share buybacks get so little coverage. The stock splits obviously get a fair amount, but the buybacks never get a lot of coverage outside of some of the financial press. And I'm going to aim at Jeff because he's covered it professionally, Kelly because she is covering it professionally. Is this just not a popular topic with anybody outside of the financial world? Jeff?
I think it's a popular topic when Apple's stock is going down. Mm-hmm. Because that makes for sensationalized news. And other than that, just the general population, they don't care.
It's boring if it's not something you're actively following. If you're not a stock market person, then it's not for you. People put Apple in the headlines for clicks. Like, that's why. So yep. Apple didn't make, how many times have we all seen this headline or had people ask us about this headline where Apple reports their earnings. Apple only made almost all the money, not all the money. Clearly they're doomed. What's happening? And, and they do that because people click through to read it. So it's really a question of the mechanics of stock buybacks don't really matter to people who don't own stock. Like, if I if I sat down and had my own E-Trade fired up on, my other monitor or whatever, and I was like day trading all the live long day, then yes, stock buybacks are a thing that are very, very important to me. But like, if I, for like, to give a parallel to this, like, David does a racing podcast, and I don't know a lot about racing, but I might see a very sensationalized headline about racing and go, gosh, it sounds like something really bad happened, and go to David and be like, so what's up? And David's like, nothing, it's fine. Like, we get this headline every 3 months. This one just, made it mainstream, and that's what's happening. So, unless you're paying attention all the time, like, you have no way to sort of calibrate what those look like. So I think it's just a question of it being a function of Wall Street, and people who are interested in Wall Street follow that sort of thing, but they're not, the people who are interested in stock buybacks aren't just following Apple's stock buybacks. They're following tech stocks that buy back, or, all stocks that buy back, or Fortune 500 or whatever. And, that kind of thing is a very different function of what Apple does. It's like 100% the business side, and not everybody's necessarily listening to that. Like, the people who super follow stuff are going to see a lot of Apple headlines because Apple does a lot as a company that's on the stock market, which is not the same thing as what they do with iPhones or things like that. So I think that's where it comes from, is it's mostly just not interesting for the most part.
I don't know. I have to admit, Mark, I missed the quote. But if I have ownership of a company of 5.2%, and then by doing absolutely nothing over a few years, I now have ownership of 5.4. I mean, that moves the needle for me, but maybe it doesn't move it for everybody. I don't know.
Well, Chuck, you get what's going on. I mean, you understand money, you understand math, you understand stocks. I think the average person that's out there, they're not paying attention to this. And as a matter of fact, I would, if I were a betting man, I would be willing to bet that you could go out and ask 10 random people about Apple's last stock split, and they would have no idea that it even happened.
If Jeff were a betting man, he'd be playing the stock market.
Yes.
Paul in the chat room says, we're just happy they do. And okay, Paul, you get the last word. For those of us that own Apple stock, and full disclosure here during this discussion, I do own a very small position in Apple stock, but you're right. I'm happy.
You as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Unfortunately, my ownership share in the company went up a whole lot more decimal points down than Mr. Buffett. But, what are you going to do? This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Headspace. Headspace is meditation made simple. I've been telling you about Headspace for some time now, about how I appreciate the fact that it is a straightforward approach to meditation without all the unnecessary trappings that some other meditation disciplines advocate, how Headspace lets you pick your own goal and then steers you toward achieving that goal. But Headspace is more than just meditation. If physical activity helps you de-stress, check out Headspace's Headspace Move workout. Need a little boost first thing in the morning? Headspace has the Wake Up, daily original content that will inspire your day from the moment you get out of bed. Or enjoy a Headspace benefit throughout the day by checking out their focus music specifically curated by Headspace Chief Music Officer John Legend. Yes, there's a lot to Headspace, but how are you going to know if it's for you unless you check it out? You deserve to feel happier, and Headspace is meditation made simple and more. Go to headspace.com/MacVoices. That's headspace.com/MacVoices for a free 1-month trial with access to Headspace's full library of meditations for every situation. That's the best deal offered right now. So head to headspace.com/MacVoices today. Thanks to Headspace for their support of Mac Voices. Jim, you put something in our Slack that was kind of interesting, and I wanted you to cover that because that too is timely with the Mars rover.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it other than the story that I saw in 9 to 5 Mac today. So it came out, and I wonder why it just came out now. But apparently, the new Mars rover, the Perseverance rover, which just landed, has a PowerPC 750 processor, which is the same chip that was in the 1998 iMac G3. So what is that, 21 years old?
So what you're telling me is Percy's old enough to drink. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, the processor.
Okay.
Well, and presumably the actual chip was not, was built, which is, I guess that's interesting too. Like, when was this chip built? What I think they launched for Mars a couple of years ago was probably put in the device 5 years ago or something. I don't know.
Mhm.
But single core, 233 megahertz processor with 6 million transistors. So apparently that chip is more resistant to radiation than newer chips and has a higher temperature range. So it'll work between minus 55 and 125 degrees Celsius, at least according to this story. But this is a chip that Apple stopped using 2002, probably something. I don't know exactly, but somewhere.
If even that, yeah.
If even that, yeah.
Maybe in laptops, to go back to the mobile discussion from the top of the show. Because I got an iMac G4 in like 99, I think. So not even a G3.
I think the iMac DV was the first. Was that the first G4 iMac?
That's what I had. Was the
no,
iMac.
Wait, wasn't the lampshade the G4?
No, mine was a G4. My iMac
and that
DV
was
with the DVD player in it. Yep. And I got that before I got married. So that would have been like 99.
Okay, I can talk about this chip.
Yes.
So here's the deal. If you take that processor out of an iMac and you put it into this rover and send it to Mars, it would not be functional by the time you got to Mars, straight up. The chip itself that Apple used, it cannot handle the rigors of space. So here's what happens. When you need to have a processor that's going to leave Earth's atmosphere, it needs to be space hardened. And so what you do is you take a chip that looks like it will meet the needs of various projects, and you start working on what you need to do to make that kind of a chip something that can withstand the space environment. So then that's a long process. So by the time you've actually put that chip or gotten that chip to a place where you can manufacture something that's going to survive in space, we are years past when everyone else stopped using it. And so this is a processor that, because of the other characteristics it has, that can make it be an efficient chip to use to drive a wide range of space-faring devices. They created a hardened version of this. And so, yes, it's in the Mars rover, and it's in several satellites that are up already. So this is not the first device to get to use this chip. But the fact that it is this rover, which is such an amazing technological achievement, and its heritage is that very iMac chip that we're all talking about, it makes it a very cool story, and rightly so. So yeah, as much fun as it would be to say, look, we can get a Mac startup chime off of this and we can boot System 8. Yeah, no, not going to happen.
Right.
But an amazing processor. And this isn't the last spacecraft that's going to take advantage of this chip. It's actually a really good chip for spacecraft.
Sounds like why Doc used the DeLorean for the time machine kind of story.
Yeah, a lot like that.
Because the aluminum is he had the whole thing.
And I imagine it's also because as the chips get smaller dimensions on the I forget, there's a word for that, they presumably become more susceptible to radiation and problems like that.
Also physical damage as well. And when you're talking about a processor, it doesn't need to be super tiny if it's going off into space. It just needs to be robust enough to be able to survive
reliable.
in space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of spacecraft that are running space-hardened 286 and 386 processors, and these are devices that were being shot out into space when Pentium was already getting long in the tooth.
Yeah, and the thing that's cool about this to me is when I think back about those G3 processors and the machines that had those in them, those machines just don't die. I mean, I don't know what anyone else's experience was with the G3 Max, but whatever it was, they were all solid. They were bulletproof. They only went away because you wanted to run macOS 9 or macOS 10 or whatever, and the G3 maybe wouldn't cut it. But that was the thing. That was the thing that did it, was it's more important to me to have newer software, so I'm going to ditch this hardware. But it wasn't because the hardware was any less, robust or reliable. I just don't I don't remember anybody having trouble with those machines. Just they were always kind of ones that I really liked because they seemed so bulletproof. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that that's what they sent to Mars.
And it also feels like, by today's standards and with what we're doing with them, they're not powerful. But I mean, well, was it the G3 or G4 that had the supercomputer advertisement that Apple put out?
That was the blue and white G3.
The G3.
Yes.
So it was the G3. So that was at one time a supercomputer level chip.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't be exported.
It couldn't leave the country.
So, there you go. That's the kind of power you were talking about. And then everything else Jeff just said, which, thank you, Jeff, because everything you said makes perfect sense. I'd never heard it wrapped up that way. Never read an article about that. But that's what you would obviously have to do, because you want to make sure, you're sending a lot of money up there, and you want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth.
Right. And you don't have the atmosphere of Earth to protect the electronics. So, they have to be really robust.
The thing I always think of is there was a story not long after the original iPhone in 2007. When the original iPhone came out, there was a story about how it contained this phone that you put in your pocket, this giant iPhone, because remember, it was huge. This giant iPhone contains more technology than NASA used to send and retrieve people from the moon. Yeah. And so when you think about computing needs, right, mine to Twitter and Instagram and check my email and whatever, play a game and whatever else I'm doing with my phone, those are very different computing needs than what you need to send something to Mars. So, that part of it, I think, is kind of what gets lost. Now that I know it's a G3, I would like to know, what it's doing besides sending the pictures back. We know there's some sort of operating system on it and that kind of thing, but I'd like to see if somebody dug into that a little bit.
Controlling the landing?
If somebody could tell us a little bit more about, what those computing needs look like. I just think that's interesting. And we know it's running some form of Linux, because there's been a lot of Linux jokes about how Mars is now the planet with the most Linux machines that have working sound.
No, I think it's the highest percentage. It's the highest
percentage. That's what it is. Highest percentage. Yeah.
And following up on Jeff's point, it's not just the Earth's atmosphere for this application; it's also the Van Allen belts. Mm-hmm. So if something's in low Earth orbit, it's a lot less radiation than when it gets more than about 800 miles away. Then it's way more difficult. I think they are using a lot of consumer electronics on low Earth orbit satellites now that aren't specially hardened.
One last topic that has been suggested in our chat room that I want to bring up. Anybody using the COVID-19 utilities on the Apple Watch?
Yes.
Okay, good guy. I know I am. on my phone and my watch, the one that was issued by the state of Pennsylvania. And so, and I've been alerted twice that I was potentially exposed. And so far, I'm doing good. But the rollout here in Pennsylvania, and we don't want to get into politics, but it was kind of pathetic. I mean, we do not have nearly the percentage of people using it that we should. So, Guy, what's your experience been in Virginia?
I haven't gotten any positive hits, thank God. But I check it about every 3-4 days to see if there's anything that's come up, mostly because it hasn't notified me of anything. So I keep thinking that I'm either doing something wrong or I missed the notification or something. The liquor's like, nah, you're fine. Go about your business. And it's like, okay, all right.
Mark, turned it on.
Oh, sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
I turned it on a couple of months ago here in California, and actually I forgot about it until you mentioned it. Haven't heard a peep.
I have the Pennsylvania one on my phone. Never went off for me either.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got the Colorado one the day that we could activate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I've had 0 notifications. Now that may be also because I'm being especially cautious, and I'm doing everything I can to avoid being around areas where I could potentially be exposed.
That's true for me too.
As well.
COVID would never dare come to Jersey. That'd be a bad move, particularly Hoboken.
I work at a retirement community. I actually been in the COVID wing, and my watch and phone didn't tell me anything. So there you go.
Well, what that tells me is no one in your COVID wing has installed
has an iPhone
tracking app.
Yeah. That's probably that. Yeah, that might be true.
I think the weak link is I think you have to tell it I have COVID so that it goes out, because I have it and I used to look at it, but I've stopped because it just seems to log when it's in range of another Bluetooth ID device. So unless somebody enters in their phone that, I have COVID, it's right. There's going to be no data to notify the network of people that it's logged. Chuck, when you said you got notifications, did you see this by checking the app, or did it somehow give you a stronger alert of some type?
I'm not going to say that it didn't give me an alert, Mark. I didn't see an alert. It asks me how I feel every day. Do I have any symptoms to report? And so, when I went in to do my daily check-in, that's when it said, "Hey, by the way, you've exposed." But what was interesting is I got the notification that I was potentially exposed like 12 days ago. So I don't know what the
Well, was that a push notification, or was that something else? Like, did it pop up on your phone and tell you, or? No, Kelly, but I probably would have turned off the push notifications given that I was looking at it every day. I just, okay. It just was one of those things. So. Well, I can't even turn it on. So you guys are lucky that you get one to ignore. Like, there's no function for me to use it here in Oregon. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I felt good about the fact that I got the notification since I didn't get COVID, because all right, it's working, somewhat. Now I'm like Jeff, I've been a little bit more of a hermit, staying away from things. But yeah. So.
Well, I notice still, I think when I look at times and things, it correlates to someplace when I've been to a grocery store or something. So, I mean, we're limiting contact, but it's not 100%.
So, Mark, you said there was a weak link, which is people putting their notice into the thing, so it says, "Hey, I do have COVID."
Correct.
I think you're wrong, but also right. There is a weak link. That's where you're right. Where you're wrong is getting people to put that information in. I think the real weak link is getting people to activate the feature to begin with. And if you're someone who is activating the feature, you are much more likely to be someone who would actually put in the information, yes, I have COVID. Because it asks for location data. And this is why we talked about it a lot on TDO when it first came out, was it's not stalking you. It's not your information. If
something happens, it's not going to send a bunch of people your name and your phone number and say, this is who got COVID. You should shame them, or whatever. Like, it's not going to do any of the stuff that people sort of imagine location, exposure tracking is going to do. And I think that was a big piece of adoption was, it's going to tell everybody where you are all the time. Booga, booga, booga. Not it.
Didn't you need a doctor to submit that you actually had COVID? I didn't think the actual person was able to tell it that you had COVID.
The actual person will get a unique code that they have to put in to the interface. And that code comes from their doctor. Right. So it's not like I could just hop into the app and say, I have COVID. And
that's what they were worried about, is everybody just playing around with the thing and putting in whatever they felt like putting in. So
no, you have to have that unique code.
But the problem with that is when so many people started getting COVID, the doctors were like, don't even come in. If you think you have it, you have it. So, as time went on, people were just dealing with it at home and they knew what to do. So
well,
people were reporting it.
And when we were in that window where the doctors are like, if you think you have it, we're just going to assume you have it.
Right.
That was at a point when no jurisdiction was implementing the track and trace features.
Yeah. So I could say anyhow. And I could say Illinois doesn't have it. It's not enabled right now.
Yeah. So what I think I heard everybody just say is that the failure here, the failure point is the human.
All sounds like the technology that way.
A human.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Somewhere.
But humans are perfect.
Well, yeah. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the failing is that there's not a human here who went, we should hook into this. It's on everybody's iPhone and everybody's Android phone, and we should figure this out. Like, that's the same problem David's having. Like, that's the failure. So
there's a lot of deniers. I don't think if somebody has it or had it, I sort of get the feeling that a human doesn't want to put that in there because, like you were saying, there are those that think that somehow everybody in the room is going to know it's them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that scares a lot of people.
Yeah.
Guys, we're way over time again, but that's nothing new for this crew. And we didn't get to a lot of topics, so we will do this kind of show again in the future. So folks can bring their own topics. Chat room, you are welcome to suggest them anytime. It always gives us something we can cover. So let's go around the room, let folks know where they can find you, and we'll then get out of here and go check our COVID watches.
Everybody got COVID. We're talking about it.
Yeah. David, we'll keep the same order and let you start.
In Touch with iOS. You can find me there at intouchwithios.com. Jeff's going to be on the show this week. And you can also find me on Twitter at DaveG65 and the Mac Show and Mac to the Future Go livecast tomorrow night with Guy and Warren. And that's it. Yes. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. Mr. Jim Ray, where can folks find you?
Well, my day job, you can find me at proview.com. And personally, you can find me at ProViewJim on Twitter.
Okay. And what about your night job?
That's also proview.com.
Oh, okay.
And weekends and
holidays. I thought maybe there's one I didn't know about, Jim.
No. The right answer, Jim, is you're not cleared for that information.
No, that's it. That's day, night. It's a calling or whatever.
Frank, where can folks find you?
Well, about 5 minutes after we're offline, I'll be under the desk trembling. But other than that, you can find me at ympnow.com. We just came out. The new March issue of Screencast Online just came out. And today was the tip tutorial, just to push for it. Hi, Don. And you can usually find me lurking in the audience at Mac to the Future. And also Saturday, the suburban Chicago Apple users have a meeting, which is hosted by Mr. Ginsberg.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. Good to have you as always.
Thanks.
Mr. Searle,
Yeah.
Would you repeat that thing you were doing when David was talking about Back to the Future Go?
What was that?
I don't know. It looked like your head was coming off your shoulders. I wasn't quite sure what was about to happen.
Well, let me try it.
You got two people to mention it.
Linda Blair.
I'm delighted when anybody ever talks about it. It's like, yes, come and join us there, please. I am Mac Parrot and Vert Shark over on the Twitters. I am Guy at mymac.com. I, of course, I do the Mac to the Future live cast on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The mighty mymac.com podcast with Gaz we've been doing for over 10 years. The very odd and weird Guy's Daily Drive, which is done on an infrequent basis. Yeah, and there's if you just look up Mac Parrot in all the various ways that you can send me money, that it'll all work.
Great. Thanks for making that clear, Guy.
Sure.
Good to have you. Ms. Kelly Gamont, where can folks find you?
You can find me 5 mornings a week where I host the Daily Observations podcast over at macobserver.com. You can occasionally find me at on various podcasts over at theincomparable.com. You can always find me on the TV feed there, where I have a show called Maximoff Overdrive, where Don Melton, Lisa Schmeiser, and myself talk about WandaVision. And there may be more news on that front later. But you can also find me where I do a show with Mike Rose called The After Show at aftershowpodcast.com. And you can find me as Verso on most of the social things where people share stuff. Excellent.
Thank you for being here, as always, Kelly. You and your Marvel backgrounds.
Yes.
Warren, where can folks find you when you're not here hanging out with this crew?
Well, Dave and Guy already told you. They probably know more about where I am than I know where I am sometimes. So they told you where am I. So they told you we're all going to be on those shows. You could also come to the Facebook group, the Back to the Future Facebook group, where we generally just sit around and wonder what would be happening if Steve Jobs was still alive. We just kind of sit there and say Apple would have been so much better, and that's what we talk about. So if you want to do that, just join us there.
Excellent. Thanks for being here, Warren. Mr. Gamet, it's always a pleasure to have you.
And it's always absolutely awesome to get to hang out with you.
Where can folks find you when you're not here hanging out with us?
Twitter and Instagram, JGamet both places. This Thursday on This Week in iOS. And Dave, I want you to know.
In touch with iOS.
What did I just say? Seriously, what did I just say? I have no idea.
Someone else's show.
Yeah. Start again.
So, wait a second. Is there a show with the other name that I?
Of course.
I believe so. Yes.
This Week in iOS? Yeah.
Is it?
Yes.
I touched myself with iOS.
This Week in futons, okay. I'm sure.
So here's the problem. I get around on podcasts.
Yes, you do.
Yes. And I have a hard time remembering what I had for lunch. And so now I've completely screwed up. And Dave, I feel so bad about that.
Well, let me just jump in and interrupt you, Jeff, and then you'll get a do-over, because the thing I forgot to mention about where you can find me is you can find me hanging out with Frank and Dave this weekend at the Suburban Chicago Apple Users.
That's right. You are speaking.
That's right.
Oh, nice.
And
that's a really
right.
fun
That's
user
right.
group.
Kelly's speaking. Kelly, what are you talking about?
It's a surprise.
WandaVision.
WandaVision.
We gotta wrap it up here.
I'm gonna explain multiverses to people. Jeff, I'm sorry I stepped all over your where we can find you. Go ahead and try it. Take another shot at it. I'm sorry.
I'm kind of afraid to try it because wait, what show is this?
Yeah.
Does it even matter anymore? Is the question.
It doesn't. But the important thing that keeps coming to mind is, Warren, I don't care what Dave says, you are funny.
Dave, he's funny too. Everybody's funny except for Guy.
I think we should all have a group hug.
Yeah, we should.
This is going to go longer.
Thank you for being here.
Wrap it up. To wrap it up.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, Jeff.
Yeah, Dave, I'm embarrassed and sorry about screwing up the name.
It's all right, Paul.
He'll get over it. Mark Fuccio.
It's fine, Jack. It's fine, Jack.
Last but not least.
Yeah, absolutely. Last but not least, another great background, this time that spurred conversation. Where can folks find you?
Oh, in the real world, they can try in Cupertino under the bridge by 280 and Wolf Road, just down, from the Apple campus, or in cyberspace, Twitter at Mark MarkFuccio, or at LinkedIn with Mark Fuccio. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Thanks for being here, Mark. I would like to ask you what you're doing under the bridge, but I really don't want to know.
Staying away from all of you guys.
It's best not to know.
Smart man. Hey, I want to definitely thank the chat room as well. A little quieter than they have been tonight, but some good comments. And already we have a topic for the next time. So, Jerry, thank you. I'll be adding that to the list, and we'll see where it goes. Folks, Mac Voices Live, we do this Tuesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, on YouTube at Mac Voices TV, and on Facebook on the Mac Voices page. We'd love to have you join us one place, both places, whatever works for you. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.